It is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Alan Slavin, Professor Emeritus of Physics here at Trent University, a former winner of the Simons Award in Teaching Excellence, and a staunch advocate for better practices in teaching and pedagogy. Professor Slavin.
Thank you. And I want to just start off by saying that although the title says Understanding Science is Everyone's Political Responsibility, I also agree that you have to understand the arts. There's the marriage between the two. Having been married to an arts person for 45 years, I can understand that relationship quite well, particularly, I mean, I often will take a talk like this with Linda, as I did with this one, and say, okay, here's what I want to present. What do you think? You know, where should I change things? And so you won't know where it is, but Linda's hand is very much in here. To start with, just to give me an idea, I know this was advertised fairly widely, but it was primarily for arts and science. How many of you are in the arts and science program? Okay, so 2/3, something like that, okay, which is just useful for me to know. And I want to start off with a statement, I'm going to back this up in a minute, which is that your generation is facing challenges which are really unparalleled in history. What we've got is a world with 7 billion people. It's a house which is bursting at the seams for a whole pile of reasons, and the kinds of problems that we're dealing with that we're facing are problems which are going to be really coming to a fore within your lifetime. We're seeing parts of them now. I mean, I say, how many of you have heard this before? Is this something everybody's saying in all your classes? Okay, because it's real, okay? And I think that you are positioned, particularly those of you in the arts and science program are positioned particularly well, because there is a responsibility to cross that divide between the sciences and the arts, because people have to hear these things, and it's not happening to the extent at the moment that I would like to hear them. I want to mention that. So one of the questions I want you to ask is, what do you need to know to guide your politicians' decisions? Because your politicians are the ones who can make major changes to ameliorate the problems that are facing us. We can't do it as individuals. It has to be done on a larger screen. But secondly, when I say you have to understand science, you don't have to be an expert to have an informed opinion. Okay, there's lots of information out there. You can read it, you can discuss it. I think of Margaret Lawrence, who was a strong opponent of nuclear power, and people in the industry would say, well, if you don't know anything about nuclear power, you shouldn't have an opinion. And she said, I'm an informed citizen. I have to have an opinion. Okay, so I want to put this into context. I see that there's sort of 4 very closely related problem areas in the world. One of them is militarism, top left-hand corner. By the way, I'm a physicist. I see things in terms of pictures, and I can't operate with pictures without pictures in front of me. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm sorry if I'm blocking your route way. Feel free to move away. There's an area of militarism, which is a major problem, and I'm going to discuss that more. Environmental degradation, we've already touched on, climate change, for example. Depletion of non-renewable resources. These are things that we can't renew, that were minerals we're running out of. And there's the whole issue of north-south inequity, where by north I mean what we talk of as the developed world, and the south as the less developed world. And there's an enormous interplay among these. For example, the money spent on militarism, if you just took 10% of that money and applied it trying to ameliorate problems in the south, 10% of the money would pay the cost, as it says here, for everyone in the poor countries of basic education, water and sanitation, basic health and nutrition, and education programs for birth control. What we're doing is squandering an enormous amount of money on the military that could be spent elsewhere. At the same time, militarism obviously leads to environmental degradation. You only have to think about some of the pictures that you've seen of sort of major recent wars, or what can happen with atomic bombs, which I'll mention soon, to know that is true. Depletion of non-renewable resources is something that's perhaps not seen as much, but there's a major interplay there, which I'll discuss in a minute. In fact, in particular, one of the major non-renewable resources which is being threatened is phosphorus. Phosphorus is one of the 3 main ingredients in artificial fertilizer, and we're running out of it. And when that happens, the green revolution that uses artificial fertilizer to produce enormous amounts of crops is not going to be a possibility, okay? So we're facing problems which are really unique to our period. So let's look at just a few examples. I mentioned military, so this is the photograph of Hiroshima in 1945 after one relatively small nuclear bomb. About 100,000 people died in that blast and immediately afterwards, and almost another 100,000 died prematurely from radiation. This bomb was only about 1/100th as large as bombs we have today, and the world has a stockpile of something like 20,000 of them. I mean, this is sheer madness. If they go off, that's the biggest catastrophe that we're going to have. Do you ever even hear about them? I mean, when you talk about, when you hear your politicians talk about what is important to this country and to the world, do you ever hear of nuclear weapons anymore? Okay, it's an issue which has fallen off the table and shouldn't. We've talked about climate change, and there's just sort of 3 examples here. Again, you've seen them. The top left-hand corner is New Orleans after the Katrina flood in 2005. Climate change can produce storms like that type with double the frequency of the past. On the right-hand top, the red areas there are areas of extreme drought in the United States last summer. Okay? And that drought resulted in a corn production, for example, that was almost 30% below that was predicted last May. I mean, we're facing situations where the food security of the world is being threatened by climate change. And the bottom one is a picture of a glacier calving. The glaciers are receding at incredibly fast levels, and they're raising sea levels, and that's going to cause flooding. And that flooding, to a large extent, is going to be occurring, the biggest problems are going to be occurring in the south, places like Bangladesh. I also mentioned depletion of non-renewable resources, in particular the phosphorus case. A lot of people have heard about peak oil. Peak oil is the point at which we have reached the maximum rate of production of oil in the world. And that happened about 10 years ago. So there is a real problem with oil production. I mean, apart from the fact that burning it produces hydrocarbons, produces CO2 in particular that causes greenhouse warming. But this is a model that someone has done looking at the amount of phosphorus in the world, and what they're predicting when they try to fit that curve is that we're going to reach a maximum rate of phosphorus production at about 2020. And as I said, this is going to have an enormous impact on food supplies in the world. And it's not just phosphorus. When you actually look down a table at minerals that we're running out of, I mean, some of them, like indium, a lot of people haven't heard of, but they're used in all flat screen TVs. And there's about 10 more years of indium in the world at the rate we're using it. Okay, so we should be having massive recycling programs to keep all of these things going, and they're not even in place yet, even though we know about them. One of the problems that we have is that our political system is based on a 4-year term of office. And these problems are problems that emerge in 20 or 30 years. The two are incommensurate. They don't work together. So if you're in government and all you're interested in is being reelected, you're not interested in putting a carbon tax on people, which is going to cut down the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, but is going to take money out of people's pockets. So we have a real responsibility to change what's happening, the attitude towards these problems in Canada and in the world. So I said, are these issues being addressed by our governments? I don't know if you get these mailouts from Parliament about what we did this last, in the last term or whatever, but I mean, they raise questions like, do we need more prisons? They're not talking about the issues which are really facing humanity, and Canada, of course, is part of that humanity. There's a little bit going on. We've got, the Liberal government in Ontario has introduced green energy plans, which have been really very forward thinking. But if you look at what's happened federally, Harper has just stopped the funding for the experimental lakes area in Ontario. This is a world-renowned area in which people are studying what causes problems with lakes. It was the area where they first showed that phosphates caused the eutrophication of lakes, for example. And that's going to be canceled. The government has gagged government scientists. In certain areas, they're told, you can't talk about the research you're doing because it's going to reflect badly on what Canada isn't doing, okay? So these are major problems. And these are, of course, not just scientific problems. These are problems that span the region between arts and sciences. Our MPs, I believe that the vast majority of our MPs come to politics with the strongest possible interest. They really want to help their communities. But most of them don't see these problems in a global context. They see them in their own local context. What we have to do is somehow change the discourse so that people are looking, our politicians are looking beyond the next 4 years in ways that, I mean, I don't know how to do it. I mean, one of the suggestions I've heard is that there should be a committee of parliament which consists of people from all parties whose job it is specifically to look at problems with a time frame longer than 4 years. And that way you could get some kind of a consensus brought together, put forward hopefully as a bill to Parliament. The party in power, if it's something that people don't like, the party in power could say, look, We weren't the only ones that decided it. Everybody worked on it. And if they happen to be in power, they can say, look, hey, we worked on this. You know, this is a great idea. So I think there are things like that we can be thinking about, but we have to be inventive. I think that, you know, the people in this room are uniquely positioned because you do span the worlds between the science. You've got the ability to understand what a graph looks like, what the numbers mean, what percentages mean. And it's your responsibility to talk to the people around you who aren't in sciences and make them appreciate the fact that we have these problems and we have to change. We have to change the way we're living because we don't have, you know, any options. Thank you.